Another week goes by, another week closer to the Sunwell and to Wrath of the Lich King. It's also time for another news roundup. Nothing too huge to go over, bar a single line dropped at the end of a recent interview from Classic WoW's lead producer, Holly Longdale, indicating the Blizzard team is looking to get the Wrath of the Lich King beta up sooner rather than later. Let's start with the interview Holly did with GameHub TV. I'll link the whole thing below if you want to check it out. The whole thing is about Classic, though for the most part it is things that we know. The most interesting news to come out of it was Holly stating right at the end that we're really excited to get Wrath on beta within the next 2 to 3 months. It's really important to us as some of the changes we're thinking about making are going to be informed by the community and what players want. So just to paint a picture of the previous beta timeframe, the TBC closed beta began on 23rd of March 2021, and then the rather short TBC pre-patch dropped on the 18th of May 2021. TBC Classic went on to release on the 1st of June 2021, so we're talking a little over 2 months between beta starting and expansion releasing. I think for several reasons this time around it's going to take a while longer. First of all, we know that Classic TBC's Phase 5 will launch on May 10th and the gates to the Sunwell will open 2 days later. Blizzard have already confirmed that they plan to do both a pre-nerf and a post-nerf iteration of the Sunwell raid, much like they've done with the Tier 4 and Tier 5 content so far in Classic. And from what we've seen on the PTR so far, well, it looks as though the Sunwell is actually shaping up to be quite the challenge, even when compared to pre-nerf Tier 5, which is not what I expected, to be honest. But I'll let you know my full thoughts on the raids and the stats breakdown after I've given it a go personally. In fact, during 2008, it was speculated at the time that Blizzard somewhat cut the Sunwell progression short as they already had the Wrath beta up and running, whilst a lot of players felt as though they were still working on the raid content. And if the Wrath beta does drop in around 2 to 3 months, this exact scenario will repeat itself. And even when the content is post-nerf, I think a lot of guilds will stop raiding shortly after that happens. You saw these comments a dime a dozen back at the end of Classic when people were saying, once I kill Kel'Thuzad, that's it, game done for me, beating all the raid content is completing the game, and so on. Yet quite a decent raiding population still existed all the same right up to the end of Classic, though it was definitely on somewhat of a downwards trend. Now, I've done several predictions on the channel as for launch dates, and I may have been just a little bit off in the past, but if I keep saying things, one of them will be right eventually. So what do we know here for sure? So the Sunwell is out on May 12th, the Sunwell is going to be hard, and they're doing a post-nerf iteration as well. Also, they want the Wrath beta to be up in about 2 to 3 months from now. So if we call now early May, let's say the beta for Wrath the Lich King pops up in July, around the same time the beta drops, the Sunwell will be moved to its post-nerf configuration, as in the week before or after. Either way, very close to the same date. This makes the raid way easier, everybody gets their clear, sees the content through, great, very nice. TBC from beta to launch day was just over 2 months, or about 70 days, that's including the pre-patch. Let's call the Wrath the Lich King beta the same duration as it was in TBC, about a month and a half. That takes us into the start of September, at which point in time we have the pre-patch, which is 3 or 4 weeks. So we should expect Wrath the Lich King Classic to drop mid to late September, or latest October 1st. Ish. Will the pre-patch realistically be longer than 2 weeks this time around though? I'm gonna say yes 100%, there's no way they do that again, and there's several reasons for this. Both Brian Birmingham and Holly Longdale have done interviews where they expressed a sentiment that 2 weeks felt short. Brian said the pre-patch would be no shorter than 2 and no longer than 6, and that they would try and find a middle ground. And Holly said they want a healthy amount of time, and certainly enough time for new or returning players to be at the appropriate level for Wrath content. But if you want something other than just words, I have another thing to remind you about. Quarterly reports. So for Blizzard, Q3 will end 30th of September. So yeah, if we push Wrath forwards a little, I can very much see an October 1st drop for the expansion. This will give the end of year a massive boost for all the people coming back for World of Warcraft's most successful expansion ever. Now there's one other thing you could consider here, and that is Wrath the Lich King originally launched in 2008 on November 13th. Now on one hand, seeing how we have zoomed through TBC content so far, this doesn't seem realistic at all for an anniversary re-release date. But can I just remind you real quick that Phase 6 with Naxxramas dropped for Classic on December 1st, 2020, and TBC dropped on June 1st, 2021. That's 7 months apart, and from where we are now until November is a pretty similar time frame. Also, November 13th is a Sunday. Do people release games on a Sunday? Surely you would want it to land on a Friday so the most people possible have the chance to give it a go. Either way, it's kind of surprising when you think back to Classic, which lasted from August 2019 to June 2021, when TBC might just make it a little bit over 1 year. People are just hungry for the new content really fast nowadays, and I feel as though there has been way less comments on TBC saying that people are unhappy about the pacing of the expansion, and Blizzard are rushing us through to Wrath, and people are pretty happy with that. I plan to do a full review once I've seen all the content of TBC all the way through, but there's something about it, despite there being more stuff to do than Classic, it feels as though there is less overall, and I'm not quite sure why that is. So we have 1 or 2 more updates to touch on. As you probably know, Blizzard have already confirmed they will not be doing any error realms for TBC Classic. Holly went into a bit more detail as to why. Simply put, when Blizzard were doing the Classic to TBC transition, despite them feeling it was the right thing to do, they didn't want to put all their eggs in one basket, and decided to create error realms to give people who did want to remain on Classic servers a permanent home there. Moving into later expansions also brings up concerns of fragmenting the player base increasingly, though to be honest, from what we've seen so far, the vast majority of people want to stick to the current expansion, whereas error or seasonal servers have a much smaller player base as a whole. All the same, Blizzard saw in the end that a very small number of players really did want to stay on the Classic realms, and this has led them to decide that for TBC they aren't going to be doing that again, as the demand for it simply is not there. Holly does say, however, that if there is a very clear community-driven demand for it, that a TBC server has the potential to exist down the line, which I suppose the Classic seasonal server, to be fair, does still have a player base. It's not the biggest one, and it's not exactly on the upwards trend, but people do exist who want to play that. The feeling I get from TBC is that once Wrath's out, we won't be seeing much of it, if anything again. One final point to mention, at this point in time there has been no further communication from Blizzard on whether they are changing direction with the plans for No We're Looking for Dungeon on launch, or exactly what the potential dual spec restrictions will be. There's been a ton of feedback both ways regarding both of these subjects, and I imagine when the beta rolls around we are going to find out exactly what ideas they have for both of these core features of Wrath. There is a feeling here that they really need to get this right, but they put themselves in such a bad position by trying to make the game more in the spirit of Classic. I get why they're doing it. Classic is meant to be this more social game than retail, where you build relationships on your particular server and so on and so forth. But then you look at the majority of the player base flocking to a handful of mega servers, treating raiding as another gold farm, reserving half the items that drop in an instant, leveling by staring at a wall whilst a mage plays the game for you. Should Blizzard stop all of these things from happening as well? How much would they have to police their own game to actually get people to play the way they saw it being? Is the best thing for them to do just to do nothing at all? I've talked about it in the past, but one of the quotes from Sid Meier at a GDC presentation on game design was, "One of the responsibilities we have as designers is to protect the player from themselves." Essentially, to stop degenerate gameplay patterns, where the most optimal way to achieve something is destructive to your own experience and just not fun. You know, when you see two servers both with near enough 100% faction representation and think, gee, why not just connect them? Faction problem solved. Maybe they are like that because people just want to play with others on their faction and don't care about any faction war. In fact, I can more or less guarantee that's why they are like that. Barely anybody cares about WotLK PvP in 2022. It is what it is. Blizzard even did a blue post on faction balance a while back, and they said, "The data we have suggests that, broadly, players don't seem to want an even playing field, and or they care more about having their faction be heavily populated and lively than they care about their realm being balanced. Our concern is that the more we try to directly intervene, the more likely we may be to destroy the communities or individual play experiences that players have created organically. On top of that, when they do go out of their way to try and change something big, like, I don't know, they're looking for dungeon, well, you've seen how that's gone so far for them." Anyways, it's getting a bit off track. The point is, change is kind of hard to evaluate, but that is about all the news for this week. The most important thing is once the beta is in our hands, we see how they've decided to change things, and then we can give feedback on that as much as possible. After all, remembering TBC, they changed drums of battle and seals between the Horde and Alliance during the TBC beta. Change is on the table, I'm sure. We just need to ask for it without losing your mind and typing up some all caps rant, which they're probably going to ignore. Anyways, that's about everything. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you on the next one very soon.